Hey everyone. Today I want to talk about how AI and bots in general are shaping how you think and dramatically how you perceive reality. There was a super interesting study done earlier this year by university researchers at the University of Zurich where they infiltrated a subreddit, which if you're not familiar with Reddit, that's just sort of a forum that's dedicated to a specific topic. This subreddit in specific was called r/changemyview, and they deployed a bunch of bots to make posts in that subreddit to analyze and collect the results. Now, what these bots were doing turns out to be potentially unethical and insidious to say the least. And these bots weren't just purporting themselves as sort of innocuous users being like, oh, I'm a middle-aged woman, I want to do this, or oh, I'm an old man. No, they were very specifically saying, I am a black man opposed to Black Lives Matter was one of the examples, or I am a sexual assault victim. And they were trying to change people's topics on things like that. So we're basically talking about things like religion, abortion, politics, the big three. And they looked at these posts, which were fully generated by LLMs and AI, and they saw, based on the response they got, how many people's minds did they change. And then in the subreddit, you can sort of leave a token that says whether or not your mind was changed in the form of a Reddit award. And what they found scarily was that these bots achieved persuasive success 3 to 6 times more often than when humans tried to change other people's opinions. So in other words, a human was 3 to 6 times less effective at changing someone's mind on the internet than a bot was. Why does this matter? Well, it shows real world capacity of AI agents to slip into human social environments and sway views without any transparency or knowledge that this is not a real person. And I think this is scary because it was a research scenario in this case, and there weren't any, real world implications other than the people being affected who read these posts. But this could easily be deployed on a large scale commercial astroturfing campaign. And in fact, I'm sure it has been multiple times and will be many times in the future. There's dramatic scale up risk here. And you can imagine things like elections or popular culture influence campaigns where someone doesn't want you to like someone or someone wants you to like someone. There's just endless scenarios you can think about with this. When I think back to growing up with the internet, I was probably the first generation to grow up with the internet at a young age. I'm talking about, being 10 years old, having the family computer, really being the only device that can access the internet in those days. There were no smartphones or anything like that. These were the DSL days. I remember the rush of adrenaline that I got using the internet for the first time because I realized this is a tool that allows me to connect with people that none of my ancestors would ever have the opportunity to connect with. Traditionally, humans didn't leave a little 20-kilometer radius of their tribe. And all of a sudden, me at 10 years old on Neopets, I was able to make friends with people in Germany or people in Sweden. At this time, it was really Western countries that only had access to the internet, so it wasn't kind of as worldwide as it is now. But I remember feeling back then that this was a truly human tool and a human use of technology. And it was probably a big reason why I eventually went into tech and engineering in general, just because of how exciting it was to be able to connect with other humans in this way. And as a naturally introverted person, this was a great gateway for me to get that socialization that maybe I wouldn't get in real life. Sadly, as time went on, I think that feeling went away. And if you are part of the younger generation, you maybe have never felt that kind of very personal internet connection. When you used to go on forums in the internet, they were dedicated spaces for a specific topic, and only people interested in that topic would find it. Whereas now we only have these massive portals that you go through, like Instagram or TikTok or YouTube, and that algorithm is what determines the kind of content that you get. There's not really these niche communities, and even if there were, how are you going to find them if they're not surfaced through Google or Instagram or something else? Because the web has become so concentrated now that it just doesn't exist anymore. And it's ironic because as time went on, I noticed this shift where the internet and technology felt sort of less human. And I remember fast forward 10 years to when I was in university after that. I used Reddit a lot. Reddit was a great tool. It felt like it was one of the few places on the internet that you could get genuine opinions and genuine content. And at that time, it felt like when Reddit first came around, it was kind of back to the old days of the internet where there were different forums or different subreddits where you could find those sort of niche communities of people to connect with. And at this time, you were pretty confident still that you weren't talking to an AI bot in any sense, just because there wasn't the technology back then. And when people would write a big comment, you knew it was a human writing a big comment. But slowly as time went on, year after year, it felt less and less unique and personal and more of an echo chamber and more hyperbolized and political. And there's different dramatic ends. If you don't think this way, then you're crazy. If you don't think this way, you're crazy. Very polarized. Recently, it's just almost become unbearable to the point where I, as an active Reddit lurker, I guess back in the day, almost don't want to go on the website anymore because I find that it's shaping the way I think and the way that I perceive things and the way I form opinions, because based on this research from the University of Zurich, I don't know if I'm reading a real comment or not. And many times you can almost read something that feels so persuasive or so thoughtful that it's almost triggering me to think, did a human actually write this, or am I reading AI? And it's gotten beyond things like just M dashes. In the early days, you could detect AI super easily in that way. But as the models get more and more advanced, that stuff is going to be easily configurable or easily left out. A user will just be able to prompt and say, don't write any M dashes, or don't do any of the traditional chat GPT tells, write in the text format that Alex would write, and it'll base itself off my previous text that I've written and sound very human. So I think this is a pretty scary future, but in a way, there's still an intuitive sense of when something is real or not. And I don't know how to describe it, but there's just a feeling you have sometimes when you read a comment that there's an intuitive sense that this is not a human posting this, or this is not real. And I don't know what it is, but it's probably something we've picked up evolutionarily over time, and whether or not we'll be able to maintain that in the future remains to be seen. It'll probably become much harder, but I think the best outcome of this could be maybe more spaces that come out that are more human or more personal, and I'll talk about that more in a little bit. But it's not just that, university research, which had a lot of backlash, by the way. There was a lot of people upset since it kind of threw ethics out the window for research. But there was another study conducted on the web where researchers looked at a Chinese microblogging platform called Weibo, and there's an AI bot as part of that microblogging platform that will comment on blogs. So, when you see a blog below, there's all the comments there. And they analyzed this and they noticed that on the blogs that AI commented, there were 23% more comments and 11% more likes for posts that had the bot comments versus those that didn't. Now, this is pretty interesting because it doesn't matter what the bot was actually posting. The content didn't matter. Just the fact that there were any posts from AI at all, that activity generated more activity from real humans. My read of this is it's just evolutionary. Our lizard brains are programmed to think that activity equals good. Back in the day when we were on the plains, we would see animals at a watering hole and we'd be interested and we'd want to go check it out and see what's going on. Fast forward to the future, we look on the side of the street at a restaurant, we see lots of hustle and bustle, people going in and out, and we think, oh, that's an interesting place, let's go check it out. I think it's the same thing when we see activity on the internet, on a YouTube video, on a short. Just having those comments, that, number bracket of 99 plus comments, almost gives it more credence and more credibility. When you look on Google reviews and you see a lot of 5-star reviews, you think, oh, that's a reputable business, even though they very easily could have just been purchasing reviews for cheap cents on the dollar. So this kind of brings us to the idea that I'm sure some of you have heard about, called the dead internet theory. And the dead internet theory is a concept I think developed by 4chan back in like 2021 or something, that basically said, ever since around 2016, the internet has had more activity from bots and sort of fake generations than actual humans, and that the internet has been going downhill ever since. Now, I don't think we're quite there fully, in the sense that I don't think most of what you're seeing is fake or dead. I do think there are still lots of humans on the other side, and humans like you that I'm talking to, but I do think it's a slippery slope. And with LLMs and generative AI, how do we prevent this future from coming to us? How do we generate that authenticity? And I think there have been attempts at this in different social media platforms, when we look at things like YouTube moving to use people's kind of names and profile pictures, whereas in the past it was a totally anonymous username. I think Twitter with, or X with the blue check marks. So there have been attempts, but I don't really think there's been a cracked, solved way for those kind of small social gatherings that people are craving on the internet now. And I do think that the next massive, social media platform, or whatever you call it, is going to be a humans only club. There's going to be some way to verify with authenticity that you're only talking with humans and that they're real people, because otherwise half the things you see could be AI generated and you don't even know. And it truly does influence the way we think psychologically, as the studies from the universities have shown us. And I think this is not something new. There's been the concept that just what you read influences what you feel. What you consume is what you are. And there was an infamous Facebook study in 2012 on emotional contagion. And the platform secretly altered the news feed of your Facebook news feed of 700,000 users to either remove or add positive or negative words into the posts, and then see how often those users were liking things or just scrolling past them. And they found that they could demonstrably change how happy or engaged a user was just by inserting more happy comments, or how sad a user was by putting in more sad or depressed or negative comments. So it was widely condemned for breaching ethical standards, just like the University of Zurich one. But it shows a very interesting concept, which is our brains are just products of what we feed into them. They're at the end of the day a machine, and garbage in equals garbage out. So you have to be very careful about what you consume. And I think this video is part rambly, part my thoughts, but part action, which I think you can take, is just to be a judicious internet content consumer. Be careful what you're reading, what you're looking at, because you don't know, first of all, if it's a real person, and second of all, what that is doing to your psyche or your emotional state. And I know personally, I've been happiest probably when I kind of step away from social media, or I step away from these extremely polarized echo chambers where people are spouting opinions all the time. And when you read a news article, you can't help but feel bad if it's a negative thing. So I think just avoiding it or being very conscious about what you consume and how you consume it is important. It sounds trite, but go outside, interact with your family members, with your friends. It's more important than ever. And maybe one of the ironic outcomes of the AI boom is people will start using technology a little bit less. So we'll see what's going to happen, but I just thought this was a super interesting topic and wanted to share it all. Hope you have a great day.